Bizarre Reality Media. The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Increase the Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, Bizarre Society, and welcome to the expanse of deep conversational exploration into the fringes of social norms. I'm the one they call Shane, aka the original Shane Squatch, and today for you guys, I'm joined by Dr. Robin Perry-Braun, and we're diving into some truly captivating subjects, from the mysteries of quantum energy and holistic healings to the complexities of trauma and spiritual warfare. This episode is packed full of insights that challenge the norms. Dr. Perry-Braun's unique blend of science and the spiritual will leave you with a unique perspective that you won't want to miss. But before we get into this fascinating episode, just a quick news and update for anybody that didn't happen to catch it on the last episode. The recording day / live day for Bizarre Encounters / Bizarre Inquiries will now be changing to Mondays. So if anybody is trying to catch those lives, they will now be happening on Mondays. That being said, Bizarre Inquiries will now be happening on the first Monday of every single month. So if anybody has been around catching those lives, make sure you guys are marking the calendar so you guys are popping in on the right date. And that being said, if you guys would like to mark your calendar for the next date for Bizarre Inquiries, that date will be June 1st at about 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the usual place, the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. And if anybody has any questions, clips, or articles that they would like to submit for that, make sure you guys get it to us before then. But as I usually say, if not, we will pass it along to the next episode. And if anybody is possibly interested in being a guest on the show, sharing your bizarre encounters or experiences, or contacting me for any other reason whatsoever, you guys can do so through email, which is increaseourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys could always call or text the Bizarre Reality Media hotline, and that number is 313-364-1551. And of course, you guys can always get a hold of me through any means across social media. And for all professional inquiries, you guys could always email me at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com. And if you guys happen to miss any of that, it is all available down in that show description, so you guys can find it quick and easy. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Robin Perry-Braun. How's it going today?
Good. I'm actually in my favorite place in the world, which is the beach. So I am very happy. It's my happy place.
Well, not a better place to do a podcast and record from, I guess. And especially considering that you said it's not quite summer there yet. It's like that perfect season. So you're actually getting to enjoy it without too much heat. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a quantum teacher, I teach on holistic health and wellness, and the beach is actually one of the healthiest places you can be because the grounding effect of the sand is exponentially more powerful than the land anywhere else. And then you have the negative ions in the air, you have the ocean, you have the actually motion of the water. These are all very, very healing to the body.
So not to mention also healing to the mental, of course, because I don't know about you, but I could fall asleep in 2 seconds if I'm hearing some waves moving.
Well, and what I do for a living I love what I do. I'm so grateful to have this career. I mean, it truly is everything I was designed to do. But it can be very draining and stressful. I deal with a lot of trauma and occult and dark things on a regular basis. So being able to go and just recharge and part of what I teach, I practice what I preach, and part of what I teach is living at a higher vibration. And so this idea of doing that is you have to figure out what does self-care look like for you. And for me, I have to go unplug. I do listen to books and podcasts because sitting there all the time for hours and hours doing nothing. It doesn't usually work for me. So I enjoy using that time to listen to podcasts and books on Audible and things like that while I'm sitting, laying in the sand, if you will, and listening to the rest. So
signs of a partial introvert, of course. You got to have time to like recharge your batteries. I'm absolutely the same way. Don't get me wrong. I love talking to people. I love socializing. But at the end of the day, I have to have my time where I'm completely alone just to recharge my batteries. But it's not, again, sit alone and stare at the wall like you mentioned. Like it's sit alone and be able to read or, edit a podcast or do something like that. Something productive. But again, just like alone to be able to recharge my batteries a bit.
100%. And to that, what I help people do with the part of it is lifestyle, like where their lifestyle is needing to change to do better self-care. I think Americans probably have the poorest self-care of anybody in the world because we're just not taught to enjoy life, to have self-care. And then what does that look like? We're also one of the most toxic nations in the world. And so detoxing and health and nutrition, sometimes it feels like a full-time job to stay healthy in the United States, but it definitely requires some effort and work, but it's doable. And then when it becomes a lifestyle, it's second nature. So
say it's a multi-front war for sure. And I'm sure that we will, of course, end up diving into a little bit of that, of course. But before we get into that, I want to step it back just a little bit. And for anybody that may not be familiar with who you are, what you do exactly, why don't you fill them in a little bit on what exactly your work is and what exactly you do?
Sure. So I am what I call a Christian quantum holistic energy practitioner. And so what that means is that I have a PhD in quantum energy medicine. I have a master's in psychology, and I'm also an ordained minister. So basically, I've created a modality that I can find root causes and remedies for anything in physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual issues. And so I deal with trauma release, emotional release, and reprogramming. Everybody's got plenty of that. I could stay busy all day just on that, but I also deal with witchcraft and the occult and Freemasonry, and I work with survivors of satanic ritual abuse. And so almost everybody has some kind of spiritual infiltration into their life that isn't working so well. And so I help with that. I also deal with I do nutritional evaluations, I do detoxing, as well as lifestyle coaching, and then also looking at structural issues and, referring if there needs to be some kind of remedy. But it's all in the alternative or holistic medicine field. And everything I do is from a quantum energy perspective. So one of the things that makes me unique is that I have really, not the only person, but have pioneered what the church has traditionally thought of as New Age or witchcraft, which is a lot of the quantum physics realm. And I brought it into both grounding it in science and scripture, so that really a lot of my audience is the church community who doesn't understand that 90% of the stuff that they think is weird and wacky is just science. And so when you start to understand quantum science and how much our thoughts affect our health and our world and our life, and the law of attraction, we attract what we believe, and then giving Christians that grounding to be able to go to scripture and look at that from a scriptural standpoint that says the same thing, then they're more likely to kind of go, oh, let me revisit this where I had just thrown it out previously. And so really it's a revolutionary way of approaching health and wellness, from understanding that we're made up of atoms, we're made up of energy, everything has a vibration, everything has a frequency, and then look at healing modalities that are really more in quantum science, like sound therapy, light therapy, pulse electromagnetic therapy, and just releasing trauma energy from the body. And then, of course, we use prayer and the spiritual things, and I use nutrition and I use detoxing protocols. And so I have a mixture of, incorporating technology that helps to harmonize, I don't use the word heal, but bring the body back into harmony, or release toxins, along with nutrition supplements, lifestyle, things like that. So it really is truly a very, very comprehensive holistic toolbox. And then I have a training program that I can teach other people to do this, even if they have zero experience or background in this. So it really is designed to reproduce easily. I can teach anyone to do it, and they just practice. And I have probably over 200 people who've done my training, and approximately 50 active practitioners in my community. So.
Just out of curiosity, of course, a lot of people get into this path of trying to help people fall down a path of like spirituality and becoming like enlightened to these ideas. And of course, there's also the people that kind of start diving down the path of like psychology and trying to help people from like that path. But for you, at least, where did these things start to actually kind of converge, where you started to connect this more spiritual philosophy with this more scientific philosophy, and then extending into that a little bit? Of course, like satanic ritual abuse is something that's like completely like far into the spectrum as far as like hard cases to actually help people with. So what actually started you actually pushing into working with such difficult cases and making that like a point that was something you wanted to work with in particular?
Sure. So a quick review of my background. I was born again at 21. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I was raised in a very agnostic environment. Had a very powerful encounter with Christ and then the Holy Spirit. And I also had an eating disorder. So I was in a treatment center. And while I was there, it was like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm called to do. I went back, changed my degree to psychology, knew that I was called into counseling. Also was moving into like addiction counseling, because I'd come out of eating disorders in the addiction category. But I really was pursuing my relationship with the Lord and getting more into that. Well, in that experience, I began to have what I would call more supernatural experiences, or running into people who had, deliverance and demons and witchcraft and all this kind of stuff. So even early on, back in the 80s, I was being exposed to what we would call the more blurry topics that people don't talk about, right? But that was my introduction into Christianity, was this more supernatural component of it. So
I don't think people take into consideration, by the way, I just want to throw this in, that, nowadays, this has become something that it's still kind of talked about in the shadows, but it's something that's a little bit more common to talk about. But, the researchers that have been around doing this stuff since like the 80s, for example, back in the 80s, like I don't think a lot of people hearing this stuff nowadays take into consideration how hard it was to actually get this information and actually dive into this stuff, because it was so scrutinized up until probably like even like early 2000s. I mean, for the most part, it's still pretty scrutinized, but that was like a whole other level of actually trying to start this stuff.
Yeah, you had books and you had personal experiences, right? Because we didn't have the internet, so you only have what you know by the circles you keep as to what your experience is. So I have that over here, and then I always say God just supernaturally led me accidentally. I was struggling with chronic fatigue, and I had gone to a friend who was a chiropractor because I had a car accident. And he starts whipping out all these little vials, and he's muscle testing me. I didn't have any idea what he was doing or why. And he said, you have a massive amount of mercury toxicity. I was 24. And I said, well, what is that? He said, from all your amalgams in my mouth. I had a mouthful of fillings. And I lived in Atlanta at the time. And I said, well, what do I do? He said, you have to go get your fillings removed. I'm like, well, who does that? He goes, I don't know. So I happened to find the only dentist in Atlanta, I think, or the Atlanta Metroplex in 1989 that was removing amalgams and using composites. The ADA was still using mercury-filled fillings in 1989 and completely denying that they were harmful. So I just kind of kept getting introduced to things that nobody else was talking about. I got married, I got pregnant, I didn't have insurance, so I went to a birthing center, and my midwife, I had a great experience doing natural childbirth. She hands me a book in 1993 called A Shot in the Dark. And all I'll remember about this book is that 80% of babies who died of SIDS had a DPT shot within 48 hours. I'm like, okay, not vaccinating. I mean, this is how my whole life is gone. I didn't know anybody who did not vaccinate their kids, right? So this is just how I've been led. And so fast forward to, I moved to Dallas in 2010 after a divorce. I was married to a sex addict. And I worked in sex addiction for ministry for 4 years, and it was brutal. There's only about a 12% recovery rate. And my ex-husband did not recover, so we ended up divorced, and that's a very long but important part of my story. But I moved to Dallas. It was a hard time. I was going through what I would call complex PTSD, menopause, just being lonely, not knowing anybody there. I had gone back to graduate school at that point to continue my education. I felt like God said, okay, now it's time to transition into full-time private practice because I'd gone through the divorce. My kids were older. Prior to that, I just ran businesses, but I knew it wasn't time to do this full-time. And at this point, it was like, okay, this is the season of my life where this is going to be my practice. And so as soon as while I was in graduate school, I kept getting re-exposed, like everywhere I turned, which is often how God works, is like the law of attraction, the law of attraction, the law of attraction. Well, I had thrown that out years earlier as New Age, but I happened to go to a Bible study that regrounded this in Scripture. And basically, he used a lot of the same language from what I call Elijah House Ministries, which is one of the inner healing models I've been trained in. And I went, oh, these are just Elijah House principles. Like he was introducing these biblical principles. So I started going down that road. And really the conclusion I drew is that God created everything. And, what I call the witchcraft or anything that's not aligned with, Jesus, they just take the truth, but ground it. Witchcraft is really just truth, but misused, right? And so I was like, oh, okay, well, this stuff is in the Bible. So we just have to learn how to use it the right way. We have to learn how to use it the way God designed to use it, and not for manipulation or spells or whatever they're using it for. So I began to really study and research, well, what were the stones? Why would people use crystals? What are they for? And so they have frequency, and frequency harmonizes the body in different ways. And these are measurable frequencies. I can kill parasites with this frequency. I can harmonize my adrenals with this frequency. We can kill a tumor with this frequency. So I started learning and understanding quantum physics principles. And so then that just put everything into alignment with, well, how does this affect healing? Well, we were designed at a certain frequency or vibration. And then when we're out of sync or out of harmony, we remove the cause that got us out of sync, and we put in the remedy. And so, and I talk about this in all my books. I'm giving you the nutshell version. But how I got into satanic ritual abuse was because I wanted to work with trauma. And then I developed this modality that finds hidden things using muscle response testing within the body and within the cells and within the memory and within the generational lines. Little by little, back in 2008, I had met a friend who worked with satanic ritual abuse survivors. Well, I thought that was fascinating, but I'm like, no, thank you. I'm just getting out of a sex addiction marriage. These people don't get well fast, and there's a low percentage of recovery. I do not want to work with people that aren't going to get well. And that's what I believed about ritual abuse survivors. This is too hard. I want to see better results faster. And so as I got into my private practice and moved in this direction, if a ritual abuse survivor reached out to me, I would usually refer them. But I was also dealing with other really supernatural types of things like demons and deliverance and witchcraft and ghosts and all these other topics. So that was pretty normal to me. I just didn't want to work with ritual abuse because, one, I didn't feel equipped, and two, I just thought this is too hard. And so little by little, though, God would sneak them in. Like somebody would come in, they didn't know they were a survivor. I'd work with them for a while. Their memories would start coming back. And then I would go, okay, well, I'm going to send you to somebody who's more equipped to do this than me. But
did you come across more like adults or kids, just out of curiosity, when you first started working with SRA survivors?
So most of the time, people are a certain age before their memories come back. The dissociation and the amnesia usually lasts for a certain period of time, until they hit a certain age, or they don't have a handler or a programmer in their life anymore. And so you don't have a lot of children who are in SRA that remember. Their brain is still not fully developed, so they're still very dissociated. And unless you like rescued them and there was an intervention and their parts felt safe to start coming forward and talking about their experience, usually it's going to be an adult that suddenly has some kind of sudden onset of flooding of memories that are so weird and strange. Now, they may have like weird memories of things that happened in their life, but the average age is usually between 35 and 40. It's getting a little younger. Sometimes they'll be younger because now the veil's kind of been lifted and this is more recognized or known. So I think people would start asking these questions earlier because they would see this is wonky, this is weird, and we can kind of see and recognize things better than we could, a couple decades ago.
Hold on tight, guys. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And now back to the show.
So I've even heard too with even with some of like the ancient Babylonian like mind splitting that like I've never dealt with any of these people like working directly myself from like a psychological standpoint or anything like that, but I've even heard that with some of this programming, they may even go and talk to a counselor, but some of like the cues that anything is happening completely don't come out because they've essentially been programmed that it's, I don't want to say it's like an altered personality, but it's almost like they're who they are shifts at temporary times where it's like one doesn't necessarily like mesh with the other. Like the idea that I've kind of had broken down to me a bit is it's not necessarily like a disassociation, but rather like a different version of their personality comes out, but it's not like split personalities how people would like imagine it. It's more like one personality is aware of the other one, but one takes control over the other one kind of a thing. And I've kind of heard this from a breakdown of multiple people. So I'm assuming this is kind of how somebody breaks that down mentally for somebody that's dealt with that, correct?
Well, and so years ago, they called it multiple personality disorder, MPD, and now they call it dissociative identity disorder because there is a spectrum. So you do have full-blown amnesic alters. So a lot of the MK Ultra assassins, that type of thing, they have no idea they have this other personality. People who've been sent to infiltrate the church, they're a pastor by day and a Satanist by night. That pastor has no idea they have someone putting on the black hoodie after midnight doing rituals. They have no idea. So you do have full-blown amnesia. What I explain as personality dissociative parts, or you can call them alters or parts, is it looks like a mood swing. It looks like they just shift mood. There's not like full personalities are going to have eye color change. They might talk differently. They'll have different handwriting. They'll be just this extreme. But a lot of times, one of the things you could shift is all of a sudden somebody looks very childlike and they talk maybe in a different voice. But they may still be co-conscious that happened. So it's not like there's an amnesic split, but you just experience them differently. So to your point, there's like this different aspects, and we all have some level of dissociation in our life because trauma causes dissociation. And so, but with occult dissociation, it's done intentionally with the point of creating alters that have specific jobs. And so the trauma causes me to choose to dissociate to cope with the trauma. The abuser uses the advantage of me being dissociated to create alters that will become cult loyal or memorize certain bits of information or become a sex slave or various jobs that are used depending on what they need you for. And so often you have no idea you have a dark or cult loyal personality. As a child, most of the things that were super traumatic are going to be completely repressed because there's no way you can survive in a state of constant terror or fear.
Also, just out of curiosity, I don't know how this actually breaks down, but it seems like I've had a few people explain this where when you try to use these type of psychological tactics against like a child, for example, you're able to split this personality or shift the mind into like 4 quadrants, as I've heard people kind of explain it, where it's almost like the practice like works better, because that's when you actually get these things where it's almost like the amnesia, almost like you were talking about, where one personality can overtake the other one completely. But it seems like with adults, a lot of the time, it's almost like the same practice that they use for the military, where maybe it's because they haven't caught them early enough to really get into that stage where they're really creating their framework where they can really expand and break the mind down completely. But it seems like when adults get involved with some of the psychological breakdown, it seems to just be almost like a double split. Like it's like splitting into like 2 quadrants, where it's basically like the normal personality and then the disassociation personality. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people question why satanic ritual abuse survivors are generally kids and why they try to catch these children so early. And the reason being is, at least from their perspective and their philosophy, it seems like there's more that they could do if they catch them young, versus with an adult, it almost kind of seems like they're limited as to what they could possibly do psychologically to them.
Well, there's a couple things. One, anybody in the occult is a bloodline occult person. They only abuse their own people. Okay, so if you're not in the family, you might be used in a ritual, but you're going to get killed. You're not going to survive. So in the generational bloodline, the predisposition towards association is in your bloodline. You have these certain genetics in Illuminati bloodlines that are going to predispose you to being a good dissociative, if you will. And they start in the womb. And there's some projects that start at conception out, and they do conception outside of the womb, like the Hitler Project. But they start in the womb, and they do as many splits in the womb as possible. And you do have an initial 4-way split, but literally people can have thousands and thousands of fractures and personalities. It's nonstop, constant. So it can be complex, but when you're integrating, you can deal with groups or chunks or whatever. And, God can do more rapid healing with chunks of personalities. And they're not necessarily full-blown, like if you think of the movie Split, they're not full-blown distinct personalities. They're just splinters. If you think of like if you shattered a mirror into thousands of pieces, you might have big pieces and then you have little splinters. So you can see dissociation work in that way. With movies like Manchurian Candidate or Born Identity, where they tortured them as adults, honestly, if somebody does not have a predisposition to dissociation, it's much harder to program an adult because they have a fully developed brain. Most of the time in an MK Ultra thing, these are people who have been programmed since childhood because they're from a certain bloodline. So they didn't go into the military normal and happy and whole and then get traumatized. They were already raised into they're already traumatized to be prepped for these kind of adult programs. But even most MK Ultra super soldiers were started as children. They may not fully use them to their capacity until they're adults, but they were programmed long before that. If somebody thinks they started programming as adult, they may just not remember their childhood memories. Or there was a lot of drugs used, altered states using drugs, and it was more of a hypnosis or a trance-like thing where they switch into, like Manchurian Candidate, they give a cue and they go into a trance-like state. And there was that, but really solid dissociative identity disorder, they have to start them as children for it to stick and stay.
I know this is going to sound like a very bizarre question. This is probably going to go off into a very strange realm at this point, but at least covering from some of your research and also connecting in with some of your Christian perspective, because I assume that you're probably definitely going to have a connection into this with possibly some Nephilim ideas. But as far as going back into the point of inception, where you're talking about this whole idea of like splitting the consciousness or like the psyche of like the person themselves. I've heard about this concept of them using like different animal types of semen, for example, when they go to try to like create the child itself, and they'll mix in multiple different people's semen on top of multiple different animal semen, and this is supposed to be something that continues on with this splicing and splitting process. But if you're viewing it from another standpoint, it almost kind of seems like it could be this idea again of this this Nephilim blending and tampering with like the DNA at a certain point, because if you're trying to split the mind into possibly like a reptilian aspect of the mind, I've heard of them using some type of like reptilian fertilization in some of these ceremonies and some of these rituals, for example. So I'm kind of curious if maybe some of the philosophy behind this is something that isn't just clearly symbolic or occult, but something that clearly goes into something that's trying to create possibly like a hybrid species or like a Nephilim species possibly, or maybe even just be the first step into ushering in this next generation of these once they get whatever the process is to work correctly.
So, I grew up with Greek mythology, right? And we just assumed that was all fantasy and make-believe. But when you actually look at historically the fact that petroglyphs and Basque and art from all over the world have the exact same hybrids on them. So you have the satyrs and the centaurs and the minotaurs. And so somewhere with advanced technology, they were able to successfully create hybridization of beings. And whether they lived very long or not, they survived to a certain degree. So a lot of underground lab work, that's been whistleblown or reported is hybridization. It's trying to create hybrids and seeing what will survive, how much human DNA do they have to mix for things to survive. So whether you call it transhumanism or just hybridization, I don't think any of it's far-fetched. I think it's been going on for thousands of years. I think the Bible supports that, history supports that, and we just write it off as fantasy, but there's too much evidence to support that it's based in reality.
I had somebody coming on yesterday actually talking about the world fairs and talking about all the come and buy a baby. We have these baby incubators and the Cabbage Patch children, which works with this philosophy, of course.
Yeah, for sure. And so this idea before, cryogenics and stuff were around, they were experimenting in petri dishes with semen and eggs for decades before this. The idea of the Hitler Project was to take eggs from a specific Illuminati bloodline and put in semen from what they did as a compilation of all 13 Illuminati bloodlines and fertilize the eggs and then freeze them. And then they release them over decades because the goal was, they're all females, is to create the mother of the Antichrist.
Almost like a homunculi type of concept?
Yes. And so the petri dish combination of egg and semen was to breed a combination of all 13 Illuminati bloodlines perfectly. And then they're frozen, and then they'd be inseminated into women who are all occult over years because they don't know the exact date when the Antichrist would be released. So they're trying to create the mother of the Antichrist. Then at age 26, this person would breed with the Nephilim and the offspring would become the Antichrist. It's called the Hitler Project. It was one of Mengele's major reasons for being, was to do these experimentations, not just on MK Ultra, because Operation Paperclip was where we imported the 500 plus Nazi scientists over to the US to teach us how to do this. And the SS, which became the CIA, is just part of this super soldier the whole goal was to create a superhuman who could be sent into war as a super soldier and do anything on command without any concern for their life. Perfect Assassins, Born Identity, Manchurian Candidate. These are all good movies to kind of show what these programs were designed to create. But it was also multidimensional, like time travel, remote viewing, psychic gifting, psychic powers, psychic assassins. If I could kill you with my mind, boy, that would save a ton of money on weapons and things like that, right? So all this technology has been worked on for decades.
Right in our face too, weirdly enough, because Anybody paying attention to the Epstein documents that recently came out talks about this like breeding type of lab he was trying to reproduce to try to, get his DNA out there. And it's like, if you read between the lines, of course, this guy is more than likely probably related to these bloodlines. And then you start looking back and realizing that there's a lot of these people that are running these operations of trying to, quote, keep their bloodline alive. And then it's like, all right, I can read between the lines now. Trying to hide in plain sight almost.
Back to your hybrid point. These are some books I've read on. So when you look at and understand that we're made up of energy, right? So I don't know if you've studied like skinwalkers or any of this, right? Werewolves, vampires, all this stuff. So if you think about the fact that our skin is actually just energy, that our body is energy. So the concept of shape shifting is actually very quantumly possible, because there's no such thing truly as a solid. Everything is made up of energy, of atoms. And so part of this idea of infusing animal DNA into a human was to, if you could get it to take, then you could create the possibility of shape-shifting. So hypothetically, if I got enough wolf DNA in somebody, then we could shapeshift into a werewolf or a wolf man or dog man, whatever. And so that would be the type of hybrid experiments they would do. And to my knowledge, the evidence of that, besides the fact that we witness these things, we witness these cryptids, people see them and witness them, is that obviously there's some level of success with this hybridization program. But in the occult, this idea of shape-shifting is if you mix the DNA just right, if you have a certain amount of reptilian DNA, and so one of the beliefs in the reptilian thing is that you have a mixture of reptilian and human DNA, so you can look human, and it's not a skin suit, it's actually a shape-shifting, but then every once in a while you see the slitty eyes appear, or like somebody fully shape-shift into a reptilian, almost like it's a hologram. Well, when you really understand quantum energy, that is possible. And then they, like with the royals and all that being reptilians, is that you have to take in so much human blood to then have the capacity or the ability to shapeshift to look like a human. That's what's said about why reptilians drink blood, is it allows them to shapeshift to look like humans.
Something hidden in plain sight, too, that weirdly enough, you see this a lot where things are trickled through media, and this seems to be a constant thing that you see amongst video games, different types of characters, this whole idea of essentially like sucking something in and absorbing it and becoming like its essence. And your idea about the reptilians is pretty close to like my concept that I've kind of always felt with these things is, when you start explaining the concept to people and you start talking about reptilians, it seems like this such far off concept. But when you start looking at these things, like they don't necessarily have like a physical form in the way that like we imagine it, then, if they are something that's coming from a higher dimension, then they're easily able to manipulate the third dimension. And it's not, again, that they're necessarily completely shifting themselves into a human, but rather it's almost like they're putting up like a facade over their skin of appearing to be human. But if you can see past it, you can see past it, which weirdly enough does happen with some people. And some of the people who have been through this like psychological programming claim to be able to see, quote, through the reptilians' facade or whatever this like hologram type vision is that they put in front of themselves.
Yeah, because it's a frequency. It's like a frequency screen in front of them that this is what everybody else sees, but that's not really identity who they are. And you'll see, and I'll hear those stories. People will talk about they shifted in front of me, or I went here or there. So these are survivors' accounts, and just like everything else, if you have enough people saying the same thing who don't know each other, you have to give credence to the reports, because these aren't crazy people. And that's really how we determine this. Plus, I do a lot of research with former Illuminati members, people who coming out of SRA and the occult. They know all this. The skinwalkers, where the Native American tribes that shapeshift, they don't know how they do it. They just know it's been passed down through generations and generations. They know it involves other gods in some way, but they don't necessarily have this great sense that it's Lucifer or that it's somebody that they have sold their soul to. It's somehow embedded in their culture. And that's true with cultures all over the world. that are, aligned with other types of deities. So,
see, and that's something really hard for people to actually fathom a lot of the time. Is we have such everything in categories as humans that we say, this is this religion, this is this. And the more that I've really dived into this research and dived into the occult and everything, it seems like it's not all these different groups. It's not all these different people. Like, it seems like the characters are always the same. The people are always the same. The stories are always the same. The only thing that changes is just the cover of it, meaning like the name of the character, what exactly the location is that it happened in. But if you look at it from the way that the location is described, such as like, oh, this happened up on a mountaintop, this happened over here, like we're clearly passing around the same stories, and it's just a matter of looking at them from different viewpoints and perspectives. So when you start diving into like occult philosophy, again, everybody thinks that it's this one particular bad guy, or it's this guy over here or something like that. But it's almost like it's gotten to a point now where the philosophy is so ingrained into so many different philosophies that nobody quite knows where the head of the snake is, but they've put up such like a mask facade of confusion that, again, we're all talking about the same thing here, but they've created this illusion of not necessarily knowing which direction to attack it from, because, if one group projecting the philosophy dies off, then another one's going to rise up, or this other one's going to rise up over here. Like, there's never a way to fully like cut the head off the snake, so to speak, because it's just ingrained into so many different ideas and philosophies and carried on by people that may not even realize that they're carrying it on half the time.
Yeah. And I think, the idea of the Luciferian concept is that, Lucifer is the exact opposite of a loving Father God, but he's a liar. So he represents as you're special. Illuminati means illuminated ones. You're more elite. You're more special. You're chosen. And if you do these things and serve me, you will be given. It's the exact counterfeit of God, but it's darkness instead of light. It's death and murder and taking lives and violence and blood and sacrifice. Obviously in the Old Testament, all the times the Moloch or Baal, they gave their babies to be burned in the fire in order to have some kind of favor with their crop. And that was just part of their culture. It's part of the Druid culture. Halloween comes from Druid rituals of human sacrifice and just really dark things, because that was all they knew. Right? When you grow up in Satanism, you don't know any different. You don't know the worlds differently. You're so in mind control is about so ingraining you in lies, and that, the truth is a lie and a lie is truth. And you don't know. It's very, very extremely dark. The Jesuit programming is extremely complex and effective and so horrific. You can't even imagine how it messes with your mind, and there's no sanity. So even a lot of the programs are, if you go to counseling, they will put you in a mental institution. They will say you're crazy. They won't believe you. You lose all your friends. If you go to a church, they'll kick you out. They'll be scared of you. They won't, you get all these programs, some of which end up being true.
Inquiries of Our Reality will be right back after this brief commercial break, so stay tuned. And now back to the show.
I feel like there's so many people involved a little bit of everywhere too, that unfortunately it seems like as soon as somebody does try to talk out about anything, whether it's in an academic perspective, religious perspective, like no matter what perspective, like there's of course always going to be the people that are trying to get the information out and help those people, but there's always still going to be people within those groups trying to suppress the information for their own means. Because, that's part of the group, of course. A couple of
examples of that. Kathy O'Brien, who was a presidential sex slave, has written a couple of books she's got the receipts, she's got the paperwork. And so she said, between me and the top level of government, let's say there's 7 tiers of chain of authority that things have to go to get from here to here. So they're going to put Satanists in 2 or 3 of those positions. So things are never going to get up to the highest, to the chain of authority where justice would be executed. So even with the Epstein files, we see we're not seeing justice because too many people are involved, right? The people who would be able to execute justice are part of the club. And so who then do we look to actually be able to have the teeth, have the power, have the authority to execute justice for these crimes against humanity. And a lot of times they'll sacrifice their own. So Harvey Weinstein was a sacrificial lamb, right? So there was too much P. Diddy. There's too much that they get caught. Now they're probably going to get a couple of years and get their hands slapped and get off on parole, or they're going to get suicided in prison and then live off on some island the rest of their life. But sometimes if there's too much evidence, it's like, oh, we're going to have to do something here because they really got caught. Epstein finally really got caught. The veils are being lifted to where the data's coming forward. But there's so many people implicated that who's the policeman now? Who's going to be the ones to put the handcuffs on?
And it seems like this web is getting even bigger constantly. And I don't want to give too much context on this because I want to get your perspective on it before I start really throwing my opinion on this one. But, a lot of the time it seems like when people are starting to chase after this whole concept of these bloodlines, they usually go after the Jewish families. And that seems to be the trademark for a lot of this stuff. And again, I don't want to get too far into it, but diving into some of this satanic ritual abuse stuff, have you found a lot of connections yourself with the Mormons more so than anybody?
Oh, yeah, I have several survivors. So you have, the Zionists, right, which are not, so if we look at history of Jews, I'll just go into this real quickly. The Eastern European, the Khazars, they were not from the bloodline of Abraham at all. So they were a completely different bloodline. They're not Jewish. The Ashkenazis are not Jewish. They actually converted to Judaism. They were forced. They were the Baal worshipers, the Canaanites. They were the ones sacrificing the babies to Baals. They were forced to convert. They chose to become Jews by conversion. So when we're dealing with what we call the Rothschilds, right, they track their bloodlines back to the dark lines of baby killers, baby worship, baby sacrificers. But they are Jewish in name, Jewish in name only, right? So this idea, I don't like to use the word Jew because I want to separate political Zionism. Most of those people are Luciferians.
It's kind of like the whole concept of the Freemasons, and I break this down all the time for people that everybody who has a focal point on this goes, it's that group as a whole. It's the Freemasons. Right. It's the Jews, not realizing that there's subcategories of these groups, and they, of course, have to have a buffer to actually hide the group that's doing something. So that being said, of course, most Freemasons, most Jewish people, they have no idea what's going on. It's the group all the way at the top that knows everything that's going on, and it's almost like a pyramid scheme that they're using this entire group as a buffer, and they purposely will use these groups that also have the incentive of you really can't talk about them, otherwise you're going to get yourself into some social trouble, of course.
Let's brilliantly use the anti-Semitic thing. This is not about Judaism. This is about Luciferianism that's hiding in Zionism. Mm-hmm. Okay? And same with the Freemasons. Freemasonry is a Luciferian cult. Manly P. Hall wrote Morals and Dogma. He says, Freemasonry, the great architect of the universe, is Lucifer. Now, that was infiltrated in the 1700s. Prior to that, the Masons were just a guild. They were just tradesmen. And they actually walked in a lot of integrity. So when the Illuminati got booted out of Europe because they were getting too powerful, they just went underground and infiltrated the Masons and took over. And then all the O's and vows go back to Babylon. And, I do Freemason renunciations every day of the week with people. Like, that is a very, in my opinion, the most responsible for the most issues in our American culture goes back to the oaths and vows that are taken by the Freemasons that are passed down in the bloodline, and we call that generational iniquity, that allows contracts to be made for addiction, depression, anxiety, incest, sexual abuse. All of that goes back to the Luciferian Freemasons. So I won't go into great depth in explaining that, but it's a spiritual principle. It's also a genetic principle. The Mormons, the whole Mormon church, everything, all the oaths and vows in the Mormon church are Masonic oaths. The Mormons just a repackaged Masonic temple. There's a Mason symbol on the Mormon temple. All of the stuff Joseph Smith did was Masonic. The Masons have infiltrated everything, our government, our culture, the Washington, D.C., most of the churches, all of the cities, all of the towns, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they've all been affected by infiltration with Freemasonry. And so that's like a spiritual slime that then creates what we call legal ground or open doors for infiltration with demonic and dark forces. And so, yes, the Luciferians control the Zionists, they control the Masons, they control the Jesuits, which is the satanic ritual arm of the Catholic Church. And so all of those are basically all pointing to this idea of these bloodline families that you won't even know their names or who they are. You see the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, they're not at the highest pinnacle. The people at the highest pinnacle, you'll never see them in public. But they have their fingers in all this. The goal is the New World Order, one world government under Lucifer. That's what New World Order is. Okay, the problem for them, good for us, is that they're going to infight all the time because they're ruled by Lucifer. Lucifer doesn't have unity. He doesn't have agreement. There's no good qualities about the Luciferian or the satanic dogma. There's jealousy, hatred, competition, all these things. So they don't get along with each other, right? And so, yes, you have agendas, all of Hollywood, all the Hollywood studios are Jewish. All of the news media are owned by Jewish. And I put quotes there because most of them aren't practicing Jews at all. They just have Jewish names. And so, but it has something to do with who they're connected to. It's the bloodline issue. And it's not who we think of as what we would have called the bloodline of Abraham or the line that Jesus came from. Unrelated completely. And that's where this whole anti-Semitic thing comes in, is that we're not attacking a religion. These are not religious people. Their just name ends in Stein, and they claim to be cultural or ethnic Jews. But most of them have no idea what their who their bloodline is. You're not even allowed to take a DNA test in Israel. Israel's citizens cannot do DNA tests. Why is that?
Seems like a perfect way to draw attention away from the group, because it seems like if you follow the line, a lot of the time the group constantly moves, and that's when you notice that these wars start. You have all these uprisings that'll start. So at a certain point, I feel like they will become aware of the fact that people are on to knowing this specific group. So of course you have to start shifting it over, but it's going to take time for people to really start noticing these connections. And it seems like this Mormon one has been something that's been kind of hiding in plain sight for a little while now, where if you know what to look at, you know exactly what you're looking at. Like Ivy Ridge, for example, was a big thing that came out that had all these Mormon connections to it. They were doing these documentaries about it. It was connected in with this bigger organization called WASP, which also kind of funny that you use that symbolically for a name for an organization that's doing psychological brainwashing for children. But again, hiding this stuff in completely plain sight, and nobody's even really paying attention to the Mormon aspect of it. They do this big documentary, and of course people are paying attention to the abuse of the children, but they're completely looking over the aspect of the Mormons. And continuing on with this, of course, these guys are also the same ones that own Stardust Ranch, and they own all of these Skinwalker Ranch and everything. Wow. They make it look like, they're just have all these guys out here like blowing stuff up with missiles and seeing like what it could possibly do. And they got all these bombs and everything. But like realistically, I think that they're connecting into something a lot bigger than what we realize. Like, I think that almost, for lack of a better term, like these groups almost have like different like jobs that they're trying to conduct. Like it almost kind of seems like the Mormons in particular, they have this connection in with trying to open up portals or whatever way you want to view that, stargates. They have this other connection with abuse and psychological brainwashing of children. And then this other one that seems like there's this weird connection that's around the Mormons, but I haven't quite been able to place it. But, maybe you could possibly find a connection with it. But diving into some of like the mutilation cases, everybody is obviously aware of like cattle mutilation, but one of the main things that seems to get covered up constantly is this aspect of human mutilation. And a lot of the time the human mutilation kind of follows the same guidelines as cattle mutilation would. But if you really start looking into it, like I said, it seems like there's this also a connection with that with the Mormons, but it's like hard to quite place your tongue on what the connection is with that. But I'm assuming that it is some type of continuation on with ritual or abuse, and it probably links into what they're doing with the stuff with the kids and also with the portals. And there's probably this concept that sits in between all of this, that if we just stood back far enough, we'd understand how all of these things blend together. But have you noticed like any of these big connections with like the Mormons in particular, like I've been kind of noticing with these particular fields?
Well, so again, why the Mormon would be vulnerable is that from a Christian's perspective, they don't believe Jesus is God. It's very cult-like in its design, and it's rooted in Freemasonry. They seem to be very sisterly connected, if you will, with Scientology too. And so you also have what we call ley lines and nodal points. So essentially, when you understand energy pathways, every Mormon church is going to be on a ley line. And so they can conduct a ritual in one place, and the effects of it are going to go through all the church points. When you start dealing with pyramids and the idea of ley lines, they're all occult locations being connected at the same time. But some of my clients who were Space Force, they did time travel, these other projects, they were Mormons. So there's definitely this connection with the cult in the Mormon church that has to do with more extraterrestrial type of things, with portals, time, wormholes, portals, time travel, space travel. So there's definitely a connection too with Montauk Project, which was teaching all these things, how to create portals, how, similar to Stranger Things, opening portals using technology and psychic power to looking glass technologies, looking into the future, creating portals, and then figuring out how does time travel work? How can they get people through portals to go to other dimensions? There was definitely a connection there. Michael Aquino with the government was connected with Montauk and super soldier programming. And there was definitely a connection with the Mormon church, especially in Mexico, with a lot of that type of ritual training, if you will. So
hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And now back to that deep conversation you crave.
Didn't the Mormons also have a connection in with, I believe it was called the Stargate program too, but that whole thing that a lot of kids remember from like the early 2000s where you go down to that classroom and you do like the hearing tests and everything. And I'm assuming that was supposed to be some type of connection to see if you had telepathic abilities or some type of like intuitive abilities.
Yeah, and when you get into hemisync programming, which is your right and left brain having different frequencies, they were actually trying to develop the ability to create portals in their mind, also to access them from other realms or dimensions. So this is all really kind of starting to come out now, where people are understanding some of the, I don't want to use the word sinister, because I don't think it was evil, demonic. It was more like psychic training to see what does the mind have the power to do, and especially with certain gifted individuals that we can then later recruit. Most of those, the ones that did well, a lot of them later got recruited to be in the CIA or to be some kind of operative. But the whole remote viewing project was huge as far as how they were using that to spy. So we look at these things with government applications. The sex slave programming is, hey, I'm going to create a child sex slave. We're going to take them in and have them have sex with a senator or someone like this, the honey trap thing. And then two things come out of that. One, blackmail. But secondly, if I've created a quantum entanglement with sex with somebody, then the occult now has access to that person psychically. They can access them because they had sex with their sex slave. So there's demonic power and attachment with sex. And that's why you have sex magic, and you have, sex, blood, and life, death. Sex, blood, and death. Those are the three most powerful commodities traded in the satanic realm. And most of the MK Ultra was figuring out, even back to Mengele, is that we have to blend in satanic demonic power to actually get this to be really effective. We can't just use drugs and technology. It's much more effective when it's spiritual, when there's demonic or satanic attachments with it. And so, again, there's great Mormons out there, but the Mormon church as a whole the seals and the ceremonies they do in the secret seals are very weird and strange and dark and ritualistic in nature. And there's a lot of strongholds or things that come out of people who've been involved in Mormonism, in my experience, that is resonant with all of the MK Ultra and SRA types of things. So some of the stuff you mentioned, I was not familiar with, but definitely I know you guys have done a ton of research on things. With the human mutilation, I would just say that any branch of this is going to involve human sacrifice at some level. A lot of the Epstein stuff too, they're really understanding with cloning. Cloning is a real thing. So this idea of creating clones, super soldiers, offspring, all those things that genetic experimentation that Epstein was also doing, besides all this other horrific human sacrifice and adrenochrome and all this other stuff over here.
Saying he's just one of a bunch, and unfortunately it seems like with a lot of this stuff, when you dive into it, there's this giant group that's doing this, but they kick one out of the group every once in a while so that everybody kind of has a face to blame for a while. And it seems like all of the weird stuff that they had going on, they put under the facet of Epstein. And after they put it under the facet of Epstein, they also have all these people discussing it. So now they're putting it into a point where, like, the information is becoming so obscured that eventually I feel like it's going to get to the point where it was like Diddy, where it was like everybody was like, holy crap, when it dropped. And then a couple years later, all of a sudden everybody's like, meh, and everybody just kind of forgot about it and they're just continuing on with their day. And I feel like,
or let's just go to war with Iran at the same time and have that overshadow,
Yeah, just trying to just smash people with as much information as possible so they don't know which direction to go in anymore. And that seems to be the tactic for a lot of this stuff.
And, the nature of man is to go into denial if something is too hard to accept. I think we were well prepared for the Epstein files to drop when they did, because the trickling of SRA had been happening, and this kind of blew open the doors. And I think since Epstein has dropped, I know that the podcast I was on talking about SRA, I got so much feedback and emails from survivors who were like, hey, like when the Epstein files hit, I had a flood of memories come forward. Or they're just, I always say, hey, if you go into a muddy swamp and you see a log and you pick up the log and you see all of these creepy crawly critters under there, they were always under the log. You just didn't know they were there until you picked up the log. Mm-hmm. So all the stuff we're seeing has been there for decades, if not thousands of years. We just are now seeing it for the first time. It's being exposed. And so the shock factor is, oh my gosh, we're in such an evil time and season in the world. I'm like, well, I kind of feel different. You don't see the darkness until you shine the light in it. And so we're pulling up the logs and we're seeing all the disgusting dregs of humanity. But it's been there a long time. It was just hidden in darkness. And so when you start getting light into these things, I feel like that's putting us in what I call a higher frequency place, because we're seeing exposure. We want to see justice too, but at least we're seeing exposure. And I've been in this field a long time. I've known this stuff was going on for a very long time. And, our frustration is, well, when is this going to get exposed? When are people going to believe survivor stories? When is this going to stop, because you can't get away with it anymore? Well, that's what we're seeing happen. Is it's harder to get away with because you can't just do it in plain sight now without people seeing it or identifying it somehow.
Sometimes you got to pull apart a room to be able to clean it properly, Sometimes it's going to look trash in the process, but by the time you get done, it's going to look like a whole new room,
Yeah.
Also, kind of stepping it back just a little bit before we start wrapping stuff up too. Stargate, of course, is something that's always fascinated me for a while, considering that I was in that generation, that I remember all these tests and everything happening as a kid. And it seems to be one of those things that it kind of lives in obscurity, where everybody remembers it, but it's really, really hard to track down like specific cases of like continuations of what exactly happened with these experiments. So with that, of course, I'm assuming that, with your response, of course, with you saying that some of these people ended up becoming like CIA agents and everything, you've probably talked to possibly some of these people who have gone through these tests and have been specifically selected through this. So that being said, of course, since you've talked to these people, does it seem like that was specifically the reason for this testing? Or does it seem like there was multiple reasons for this testing and it just seems like maybe that's the only one that's really come to the forefront so far? Because I've kind of wondered if it might also link in possibly with some technological practices as far as like some of these advanced machinery. You might need to essentially be able to guess the future to be able to use it functionally properly, like going into like zero gravity flying devices, for example. I feel like the only way that that technology would work, that you'd be able to move that thing that fast, is if essentially you can move it with your mind, because your reflexes just would not be fast enough to move these types of things. So just my own philosophy, my own theories kind of going into this, but I feel like there's more of a reason than just simply, hopefully, just the CIA agents, unless, maybe just the conspiracy mind in me looking for more information, but.
Well, no, I think the general principle is there. So Dr. Cameron, who was also known, so Mengele, I'm not sure if they were different people, but this guy named Dr. Cameron, he was kind of this brilliant psychologist who created all these testing, but he was working for the occult. And so the idea was, first of all, you have your bloodliners, right? They are naturally going to be born with psychic gifts because it came down from the bloodline. And so they're going to see if those people are tappable. And then you have all this other population, and even one of the comments I wanted to make with the Jewish thing is, what percentage of Jewish bloodline would actually make you a Jew? If it's not religious, right? If you're not going after religious, where's the cutoff that you're no longer a Jew because you've been mixed with too many other non-Jew DNAs? Like, where's the cutoff? So I'm just saying, like, how do you even prove any of that kind of stuff if that's what they're going after? So same thing here is you one of the reasons the Illuminati inbreeds is they want to keep their bloodline as pure to their powers that get handed down in the bloodline, and they do. And when you start to understand quantum physics and what we call waveform genetics, all of your DNA is frequency, it's wave. So whatever gets deposited in there gets retained in your supercomputer. And that's a lot of the work I do, is finding that stuff in your quantum supercomputer that's not serving you. But so you've got this handed down.
Like the dark DNA concept, right? Just to clarify a little bit.
Yeah. Or just the psychic power. If you have Nephilim DNA, if Nephilim communicates psychically and humans don't, then how much of this Nephilim DNA? Or when you're looking at witchcraft and you open your third eye and you're able to see into second heaven realms and see dark energies and communicate psychically, where did those gifts come from? Well, I don't believe they came originally from the God that I serve, or they were intended for us to be used that way because we're not trustworthy with them. So they're looking for these gifts because they want to use them for various jobs. To your point, the world would say, oh, the GATE program was to determine people who might be gifted for computer technology. I'm like, well, just have them do an ASVAB test or one of these other tests. Like, why would you have them do this special program? So they were weeding out, because all of the tests in the GATE program were mostly psychic type of testing. And then the hemisync stuff was to see, are they hearing, the ones that are hearing certain things, that's because it's being accessed through other dimensional realms into their consciousness. Those would be the people they would keep using or moving forward. One of my clients actually went from the GATE program to being recruited for the CIA when he got older. But he was also from a bloodline family. There was a bunch of stuff in his DNA. And so there's all of it. There's generational stuff that needs to be present. There's how do we test who's potentially got psychic gifting? And then also, are we going to be able to mind control them, program them? How much will do they have? There's all of these criteria they're looking for to put you in jobs that ultimately are still serving their agenda, which is New World Order and which is a certain amount of mind control. Or we need you to be amnesic so you don't remember certain parts of your job that you're doing that we don't want you to know.
See, that's where it starts getting really, really weird and scary, is the people that remember going back multiple times and doing these things and then nothing happens with it. Like, I was one of those kids that I remember doing the hearing test part of it a good 4 or 5 times, and they kept bringing me back to do it. And I remember hearing one of the people mention the fact that you're hearing these sounds before we're actually playing them. And I was doing the right ones on the right side and everything. So they kept having me come back. So that's where it gets weird, is it's like, is there more of a process to this? Is there a reason why they may have pushed somebody into a certain field or into a certain place because they knew they could potentially use this person for a certain thing without necessarily them being aware of it? And then that also kind of gets into this other concept that I wanted to bring up with you, since we were kind of talking about dark DNA for a second, and you were talking about how not using some of these things properly, that kind of breaks down this whole dark DNA trauma concept that I've heard people say that if you put people under a certain amount of stress, under a certain event, or under a certain thing, these certain characteristics or certain aspects of the DNA will start to pop back up. Kind of a weird thing to think about, that those might actually be something that was almost like a safeguard that could have been put there by the creator, by God himself, but you're using trauma to try to make these things pop up at times that they're not supposed to, so that you can use them for a means that they're not supposed to be used for. So just a weird concept to break down in your mind, that it's like a safeguard created by God that you're trying to use in a derogatory way that it's not intended to be used for, but it only comes out through trauma response. And again, continuing on with the Stargate, could that also be a connection with that, maybe they were using some of these, they were becoming aware of possibly some of this repressed DNA, and throughout the years, possibly pushing people through certain portions of trauma, be it like being bullied in school, or being, pushed harder by a certain teacher, or, being pushed into a certain class, possibly, that part of the continuation of this or the Stargate experiment could have been that they were also pushing people under certain trauma from certain school conditions to see what might activate potentially.
Yeah, and I think that's good. And then also what we're not seeing is how much research are they doing on my parents? How healthy are my parents? If I'm a healthy, well-adjusted kid, I'm probably not as programmable as the kid who's showing the psychic powers that comes from a broken home, right? And so the 2 and 2 isn't being put together. We're looking at the GATE program as this potentiality thing. What we're not seeing is that in the occult, nothing is an accident. The people you meet aren't accidents. The people you marry aren't accidents. You think you're picking your spouse, but it's being picked for you. And so you don't realize that till much later. They're not going to do all this work to train you and program you in the occult and then let you marry whoever you want. Right? It's all arranged. You just don't know it. So I think even in the GATE program, if the kids ended up having problems later in life, there might have been more that was done that they didn't know, but they didn't actually get recruited. I don't necessarily think the kids in the GATE program were being in SRA families. I think they were probably more being recruited for MK Ultra types of psychic experiments and government projects. But the question is always going to be, can we program this person? Can we mind control them? Will they be obedient? Even people in special forces who are going to be government assassins or whatever, they have to look for certain criteria. And a lot of people go into the military because they're running away from their childhood trauma and they're getting away from home. And so they've already come into the military with dissociative tendencies, fractures, trauma. They're perfect candidates for special forces. And so a lot of this stuff is manipulated behind the scenes, and it makes it look like you were just given this opportunity because of your aptitude. But the bigger picture was that it was all figured out that you would have higher potentiality of being a really good mind control slave than this person who came from a really happy, healthy, well-adjusted home with parents, never been sexually abused. You would be harder to control or mind control.
Inquiries About Reality will return after this quick commercial break. And we are back, so let's hop right in.
The scariest part about that is the fact that it seems like there's a lot of people that are in this field of podcasting, for example, that come from the same type of a background. Like, as many people as I've talked to that have do these types of shows, like, it seems like there's this typical narrative that stays true with almost anybody that's in this field. And ironically, a lot of the people that are in this field remember taking these like Stargate experiments when they were in high school. So again, getting into like a broader, creepier aspect of things, it almost kind of makes you wonder again if like conspiracy podcasters might have been potentially pushed into the place that they're in without even realizing that they're in. And then this adds like a whole other level to this whole like psyop of like the conspiracy realm and everything, that half the people that could be psyop to be in this place could have been pushed to be in this place to be mixing around information, but not even realize that they're intentionally pushed into this place. And again, it's like you got to look between the lines, that if you notice that there's these commonalities that you see with every single person that's fitting this group, either one, there's a psychology behind it that this person is naturally just going to become this thing, or two, there was an intentional push behind it.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's both. I think I'm drawn to fix myself. I'm drawn to find solutions to fix myself. I'm drawn to the things that scare me, because if I can master them or control them, then maybe I can fix myself. So if I was, a lot of people who are drawn into working with anti-trafficking have repressed memories where they were trafficked and they haven't come forward yet. So it's like they're trying to heal the thing in themselves that they were broken. And then you have those that don't know they're part of a cult and they're part of being mind controlled, and they're sent in there for disinformation or mixture. It's not going to be all disinformation. That's why this is hard. And I work with a lot of stuff in the church. And so you're dealing with counterfeit, but the counterfeit looks like the real thing, and it's not 100% counterfeit. It's mixed.
The counterfeit isn't aware that they're a counterfeit, which adds the harder level to it, that everybody wants to catch the guy and be like, haha, I caught you. And they're like, oh, you caught me. I knew the whole time. But what do you do if the guy doesn't realize that he's the agent? He's just, you caught me doing what? What are you talking about?
That's what the occult does. They literally will start programming a child with the Bible at a young age. They just teach them a false Jesus. It's not a real Jesus. And they can know the Bible better than most Christians. And they infiltrate the church and get involved in ministry. And because demonic entities work through them, they don't even know they have these other. A lot of my clients had been ministers in the church for years before their memories came back of being in the occult. And they were gifted. And it can be terrifying, but that is the consistent story. I have clients whose parents are pastors or were pastors. And so where is the enemy going to do the most damage spiritually? In the church, to the rest of the population, in the government, in the legal system. They're not stupid. They're not dumb. That's what we're fighting against. But, as a Christian, I know that authority in Christ overrides all demonic evil authority. And so part of working with SRA, a lot of it really has to do with Jesus just has to be involved, because greater is he than is in the world. And I don't know how, and I'm not saying they're not effective, but I don't know how therapists who are not Christians or using a Christian modality can really help satanic, not just DID people, but satanic ritually abused, because you are dealing with demons. You're dealing with entities and demons. These people who abuse children, they are possessed and controlled and dissociated themselves. You think only an evil person could abuse a child. I'm like, it's not necessarily true. You can see all of these people have multiple personalities and they're dissociated. They don't remember what they're doing, or they're completely walked in by a demonic entity to take over, or it's a reptilian thing. They don't care about human life. They're non-human. They just look human. All of those things are real and they're possible. And yes, to somebody, in my opinion, who doesn't have a greater source of peace in their life, this is terrifying. I wouldn't want to know about this stuff if I didn't have a link to the person who could protect me or give me authority over it. I would run away from it too. Who wouldn't? And so I get it. I'm not judging people who don't want to look at this stuff. It's terrifying unless education and knowledge can be really helpful to know where you stand on these things. And don't even get me started on targeting individuals with directed energy weapons. That's a whole new realm that's exploding with, clients who are being targeted with frequency.
And being dropped under the radar too, of course, because I was just talking about this on a show yesterday that the voice of God was patented in the early 1900s. So imagine 100%. Where it is now. And just semi-recently, they talked about the whole thing where they went into Venezuela and they supposedly used these projected energy weapons that made people's ears bleed and that they vomited blood from their mouths, like just completely flown under the radar of people that they just, nobody's even talking about it anymore.
Yeah, the Havana syndrome, the voice to skull technology, these are patented technologies and they're targeting people with them. And so I get that it's scary getting, a large percentage of Americans are going to get cancer. That's scary. And what I do in my practice is I give you tools and principles so that you can know how to not be vulnerable if possible. Targeting's a tough one because it's not just demonic or evil, it's complicated. And some of the people that are targeted, it's tormenting day and night. And so, by the grace of God, I have some technology that helps with nanotechnology. And, that's why I do a lot of energy work and frequency stuff. We have a lot of, me and my buddies, we have a lot of technology that helps with all of these energy weapons and nanotechnology that they're bombarding on us with in chemtrails and all in the graphene oxide and all these other things to try to take over and hack our bodies and use them for whatever they want or just drive us crazy or destroy us. So with every time there's something that comes out, somebody has some kind of counter technology or a hack to do that, but we have to take it seriously. And not everybody in the world's ever going to be targeted, ever. But we don't know who is and who isn't, and who isn't and who isn't vulnerable. So I think that knowledge is a friend. Knowledge on how to, what happens when you put metals in a microwave, right? We all know what happens. So, hey, everybody should do detoxing on a regular basis. We all have a ton of heavy metals in our body. I just saw a report on the chemtrails, a 2026 report from a Midwest lab on how much aluminum was in this sample of snow that they took from the sky, and barium and strontium, all the stuff that's in chemtrails. So let's just inundate your body with heavy metals and then hit you with frequency and waves and see what happens. See, what does it do to your health? So there are hacks for everything for us to stay healthy and well. And what I started out as is trying to help people be healthy and well. I realized that God told me back in 2013, it was for such a time as this, is helping people stay well against bigger things than just normal world stuff in the world, but stuff that's even more nefarious or intentionally hitting us to target us. And there's lots of me's out there. I'm not unique to this. I have a whole tribe full of people like me that we get it. We understand this. We see these kind of people. We're working on getting these people well. We're always looking for new solutions. And there's way more brilliant people than me who deep dive into these things and have answers. So it's not hopeless. It's just one of these things people have to go learn about. It's not conspiracy. It's fact. You said it. The patents are out there. If the patent's out there, you have to imagine it's being used somewhere.
The only way to understand the dark is to actually shine some light on it once in a while. And that's always a hard thing for people, is that, you may not want to dive into all these things. You may not want to be aware of all these things, but, you don't have to let them fully affect you in the aspect of, letting it almost like black pill you. You have to be aware of these things to be able to defend against them, or to at least be cautious of these things. So I fully stand behind the fact that I think that more people need to spend more time just trying to collect as much information, even if it is something that they're scared of, just simply so that they have a base and framework of what they're dealing with, so that it becomes less scary, at least because you partially know what you're dealing with.
Well, and what I say in quantum physics, we have the law of expansion. The law of expansion says whatever I focus on, I give power to, and it gets bigger. So I say, here's the problem. Focus 10% of your energy on the problem and 90% of your energy on the solution. And so I have to know what the problem is. Okay, chemtrails. I can't control chemtrails. I'm glad that Kennedy might be doing something about it. Yay, right? Can't control it, but how do I protect from chemtrails, detox the body from chemtrails, mitigate the effects of strontium, barium, and aluminum in the body, right? How do I naturally take this human body that was amazingly designed to survive anything and give it what it needs to survive chemtrails? That's what we do. We don't focus on the fear. Hey, this is real. You can pretend it's not real. It's still going to rain down on your head, whether you pretend it's real or not. It's still going to be in your water. It's still going to get in your body. It's still going to be in your food. Let me show you what to do to not let it accumulate and then have a negative effect in your body. That's what we do. That's what we're called to do, is help the general population. It's everybody. It's not just ritual abuse survivors. It's everybody.
Hold on tight, guys. This is our last break, so stay tuned. And we are back to the show. Let's hop right in.
So if anybody did by chance want to possibly get a hold of you for some help, get a hold of some of the people that possibly might be able to help them that you have connections to, they possibly wanted to pick up your book, or they wanted to get any more information on any of the research or the wonderful work that you're doing, where can people get in contact with you? Where can people come and find you? And where can people stay up to date with you?
Okay. So I have a whole tribe of practitioners on IBRT.net. IBRT stands for Integrated Bioenergetic Restoration Therapy.net. You can sign up for a session and you'll get appointed with a practitioner where everybody is trained in the same modality. Some people have a lot of extra certifications as well. That's how you would get an appointment, the best way. You can go to my website, drrobinbraun.com, if you want to speak to me specifically or get some more questions answered before you make an appointment. You can make a discovery call with me directly, or if you have a specific need. I have half a dozen practitioners that specifically work with SRA, but everybody else is pretty much trained to work with any of the population. My social media is Robin Perry-Braun on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I don't do any of the other ones. And then just, I said the websites. You can, all of my books are on my website, Dr. Robin Braun. Also on YouTube, Robin Perry-Braun would be the name on YouTube. And you can watch any of my videos, podcasts. Some of the podcasts are linked to my website. And just, learn more information. Apparently, if you search for me on the internet, you'll find different places where I've done podcasts. So I think that covers it. And on my website, if you want to contact me, there's a place to contact as well.
And I'll make sure I include all those links down in the show description so everybody can find it quick and easy. And before I let you go completely, I always like to end the show with some words of wisdom. So if there's any words of wisdom you might want to bestow on the listeners today, what might it be?
So I think kind of what I said earlier is the enemy thrives from our fear. Fear is the biggest power up for the dark forces, is living in fear. So the goal, my catchphrase and the title of my book is really having to do with living at a high vibration, which is peace and joy. So everything I teach on is, like I said, yes, we have all these problems, so we focus on the solution, okay? And so what I would say is take your fear captive, find ways to stay balanced well, do good self-care, be happy, healthy. Make that a priority, because burnout, overworking, workaholism, staying in fear and worry is going to destroy your life, and it's not going to serve anybody else. The greatest place we can impact people is when we come from a place of peace and joy, and just having an example of our life energetically that draws other people to us, and they go, what do you have? I want that. And so that's really the goal. It really is the goal for why are we here? We're here for a purpose, and we're also here to enjoy the beauty that God gave us. And so really chasing peace and joy, getting rid of fear and worry, And it's hard. It's hard in today's world. And whatever that takes, it's not about being in denial, but it's about having that balance. Even as you said, it is, we have the education, but we balance it with joy as well.
You have to be able to set that example yourself so that other people will want to, one, follow that example, and also people will learn from your example. So
yes,
say the best way to do anything is to start with yourself first and then expand outwardly.
Yeah. And I go to the beach for that.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I really appreciate you making the time to come on today. It was a really, really fascinating conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to hopefully having you on again sometimes, hopefully sooner rather than later. I think there's a lot more that we could dive into, of course, especially because you just started diving into energy weapons and everything at the end. And I know that you still have a lot more with MK Ultra to talk about. So again, thank you for the conversation. And I'm looking forward to next time we get to do this.
Yeah, Shane, it was great to be here. Bless you.
Big thank you to everyone out there for catching this week's episodes. Just a reminder, this show wouldn't be possible without listeners like you guys. Podcasts are a labor of love, and I want to make sure this show is able to go on for as long as possible. So if you guys would like to support the show and all the hard work behind it, don't forget to leave a review or rating for the show anywhere that you guys happen to listen to the show. And of course, once I find it, I'll read it on the show and give you guys a shout out. And you guys can also share the show through word of mouth. That is always the best way for podcasts to grow and one of the only ways that they grow. So anything you guys do will definitely help improve the show. And if you guys are in a position to support the show and find value in what I do, please consider donating to the show directly. That is absolutely the best way to support what I do if you guys want to make sure that this show goes on for as long as possible. And you guys can do that through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App. And once I find it, of course, I will give you guys a shout out in the show. And if you guys leave a note, whether it's for your business, whatever you happen to want to say on the show, you guys are more than welcome to leave that note, and I will definitely read it on the show. You guys can also go and check out the Patreon, just one tier over there, with full access for just $2.50 a month. That's cheaper than a can of pop or a bag of chips, and you guys can hopefully support the little guy in the process. And if you guys are interested in seeing what it's all about, you guys can go and check out the 7-day free trial. And if you guys like it, hopefully you guys will stick around. And last but not least, you guys can always go and check out the Bizarre Reality merch store. Spent a lot of time working on a lot of those awesome designs over there, so hopefully you guys will enjoy them. And if you guys want to pick one up for yourself, those t-shirts are just $15.68 plus shipping, which equals out to about $20, so about average for a t-shirt. And honestly, I'm barely making anything off those t-shirts. I would just love to be able to see you guys wear those and enjoy them. So if you guys do happen to pick up one of those t-shirts, send me a picture of you guys wearing them, and I would love to be able to post it on social media. And if you guys are interested in keeping up with the show, you guys can also go and follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. And you guys could always go and catch live shows and video content on the Bizarre Reality Media, TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels. And if you guys need another podcast to get you guys through your work week, don't forget to go and check out my other show, Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin, if you haven't already. If you guys enjoy a lot of the topics talked about on this show, I definitely think that you guys will enjoy that show. We just go at it at a bit of a different way, meaning that instead of doing a lot of interviews, we go at it with our own research and we kind of bounce back and forth, make some jokes along the way. And if you guys miss any of that, every single thing that I mentioned is all available in the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey. With a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities,